Whether you operate one forklift or thousands, one location or hundreds, the new My Toyota customer portal can help you optimize your operation and material handling equipment. This one-stop, free-to-use platform is designed to help you take control of your information and make smarter decisions, all at the touch of a button. Register and access your data today at my.toyotaforklift.com. That's my.toyotaforklift.com. Hello, and thank you for being a listener. Before we get into the episode, I wanted to let you know about a special offer being given to the new warehouse listener. That's you. Mobile Robot Guide is offering 10% off just for you when you purchase the Warehouse Solutions Buyer's Guide. Just use promo code WarehousePod10 at mobilerobotguide.com. That's WarehousePod10. This is your comprehensive guide for all things autonomous mobile robots. That's WarehousePod10. And for more info, go to thenewwarehouse.com.
The New Warehouse Podcast, hosted by Kevin Lawton, is your source for insights and ideas from the distribution, transportation, and logistics industry. A new episode every Monday morning brings you the latest from industry experts and thought leaders. And now, here's Kevin.
Hey, it's Kevin Lawton with the New Warehouse Podcast, bringing you a new episode today. Today I'm going to be joined by someone who's actually a listener of the podcast and a subscriber to our email list. He reached out to me and was interested in coming on. So we're going to have him on today. His name is Peter Christian. He has an extensive background in industrial engineering and operations. He's also a teacher, he's an author, and he is a consultant as well. He's written a book called What About the Vermin Problem, which is a pretty interesting title. And he also has a book coming out next month in December called Influences and Influencers. Very much a buzzword these days with so many influential things in the world and quote-unquote influential people. So really interested to talk to Peter, hear a little bit more about his extensive background, and we're going to get into some discussion about facility design and industrial engineering, and how things have changed over time with that, and also how robotics and automation has kind of, I guess, maybe influenced and played a part in that as well. So, Peter, welcome to the show. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me, Kevin.
Yeah. Happy to connect and have you come on the show. It's really good to have someone that's, I guess, interested in the show, on the show as well. That's a pretty cool thing. So why don't you, I guess, give us, you've done a lot of stuff and you're still doing a lot of stuff as well. I think you're semi-retired, right? But you're a pretty busy guy. So.
Rumor has it I'm semi-retired, but I'm a pretty busy guy, yes.
So tell us a little bit about your background and I guess your experience throughout the years and how you've kind of gotten to where you're at now as an author and a teacher and a consultant.
Okay. Well, as you mentioned, I have a background in industrial engineering. I studied that in college. I got my undergraduate bachelor's degree from Rutgers in industrial engineering, and then I got a master's in industrial engineering from Lehigh University. Okay. And what really interested me was the fact that in engineering, that discipline connected equipment, facilities, and people, and that was a great interest to me, and has really kind of led me throughout my career, particularly the people part, and working then with the technical aspects. I've worked for 20 years with companies. I've worked with Air Products and Chemicals, and then with Crayola Corporation. And then got into consulting, was kind of a freelancer for about 5 years, and then started a practice with 5 other people called ESPI in Pennsylvania. And in that time, about 17, 18 years, worked with approximately 300 companies in a variety of things, primarily, though, operations. Some of those companies were, and people will recognize these names: Hershey Corporation, Good Candy, Samsung, Rogers Corporation. They make a lot of materials in cell phones to keep dust and dirt out of your cell phones. They're very large in that. East Penn Manufacturing, better known as Deca Batteries, and Air Products and Chemicals. So I've done a lot of work in operations, a lot of work in facilities, both on the production side and the warehousing side. Done a bit of work specifically with warehousing alone, where production wasn't involved, where there were warehousing and then shipping. And had a pretty successful run in that time. Counted up that helped companies to save or increase profitability in the millions, and more importantly, either retaining or adding thousands of jobs, which has always been important to me, that people were in there and were able to prosper from work that I was involved in.
All right, so it sounds like you have a very extensive background, as I was talking about in the beginning of the show. You certainly didn't make me a liar there. So nope. I'm curious about, I'm curious to hear more about your experience with Crayola. Actually, that's the Crayola in Easton where they have the factory and everything?
That's correct. Crayon folks. Back when I was still there, it was known as Binney and Smith. And then it was acquired by Hallmark in 1985 and remained as Binney and Smith. And then after I had left there, they decided that it just didn't connect with people. It sounded too much like a stockbroker or some financial services. Yeah. So I changed it to Crayola Corporation. It's still a wholly owned subsidiary of Hallmark, the Hallmark Cards people. And they continue to be the leader in children's art materials and creativity, in that regard throughout the United States primarily, because their products aren't as widely used and accepted overseas. So crayons is definitely an American phenomenon, an American thing.
Really? But, that's pretty interesting there on two fronts. I actually had no idea that Hallmark owned Crayola. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And I didn't realize that crayons were not a thing everywhere. So that's pretty interesting as well. Yeah. How was it working there? Was it fun?
It was, because people could relate to it. So when you told them who you were working for, when you got past the Binney and Smith, and they said, "Oh, you're a stockbroker," and you said no. But, they could definitely relate because of their childhood experiences growing up in crayoning and coloring, and they were having their kids doing it. We used to try to carry packages of crayons with us when we traveled, and if they had children, we could hand it to them with maybe a coloring book or something, and so we were very popular in regards to that. And it was a really good place to work. A lot of great people I worked with who left there and went to other companies and were extremely successful. So it bred quite a few very smart, good business people who expanded beyond just Crayola. And it stays very successful today too. So it was a good time. I enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, interesting. And I've been to the factory. I took my son there a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And did the tour and everything. So
the one down in Easton?
Yeah.
Yeah, when I worked there, we used to actually have tours go through the physical plant itself, but then, of course, with liabilities and stuff, that kind of became a no-no. That's when they decided to open up the Crayola Center down in center of Easton.
Yeah.
So it kind of loses a little bit. It was kind of neat to see kids going through the factory, and they were just fascinated to see all the equipment and the colors and everything. You don't quite get that kind of experience where they're at now, but it is what it is. The times change. So
yeah, definitely. But I would definitely, if anybody's in Easton, I would recommend
absolutely
take their kids there. It's a lot of fun for the kids, and
absolutely,
I had fun too. I will say I had fun too.
Oh yes, we're always kids. We never give up certain things. So.
That's right. Yeah. So let's get into a little bit. So you got this background in industrial design. So I'm curious. with the extensive background and dealing with the facility design and industrial engineering, through the years, how have you seen things change? I mean, we've definitely seen, I guess, this explosion of like mega warehouses, right? 1.2 million. But how have you seen the change, and what has been some kind of, I guess, the biggest changes that you've seen over the years?
Well, as you mentioned, mega warehouses. So many SKUs or components that are involved if there's manufacturing associated with the warehouse. Just an explosion, more and more companies providing all sorts of options of products. And, of course, the mega warehouses for distribution centers. So that was certainly changed a lot. Warehouses were decent sized before, but now they are very, very large. Lots of attention to environmental safety and ergonomics. Environmental from the standpoint of, what happens with the building and the facility itself in regards to the surrounding area and how it has to blend in and, under certain controls so that they don't cause any kind of problems, particularly drainage, rainwater, that type of thing, to make sure that doesn't become a problem. Safety from the standpoint of there's lots going on in these warehouses now. There's lots of activity. There's lots of equipment flowing around, and people really have to pay attention to what's going on. Otherwise, there can be serious accidents. And as much as there has been, and we'll probably talk more about this, automation through robotics and so forth, there's still a lot of manual labor involved. And with that, and the drive to get things out faster and faster to people, it takes a toll on the physical well-being of people. So you've got the ergonomics, and you've got to be careful about that because you can literally run people into the ground.
Right.
Everybody wants to keep inventory down, and yet, as we all appreciate, you order something today and you can get it tomorrow from Amazon or a variety of other online suppliers who have tremendous distribution and logistics. So time is of the essence. 2, 3, 4 day deliveries are definitely things of the past anymore. People want things as quickly as they can get them. So that has certainly brought challenges. The sophistication of the systems that are used to operate the warehouses, to track the materials, the inventory. If there is automation that controls that automation so that materials are picked quickly and brought to the right places to get on the trucks to move and so forth. So the systems are extremely sophisticated now. And also companies in the past used to have a warehouse that they ship from.
Right. Now
they're looking at regional warehouses and putting their distribution in a variety of areas. So it's not just let's plop one big massive warehouse someplace and ship out of there, but what makes the most sense for us? Should we have 2 or 3 or 4, and where should they be located, and what should the physical size be? Should we keep everything in there or just certain items? So there's a lot of real logistics that goes into to what warehousing is all about nowadays.
Right.
So those are the big changes that I think I've seen.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Join me for insightful interviews with thought leaders and industry experts. We discuss how optimizing supply chains can break down the barriers that are holding businesses back. That's All Business, No Boundaries by DHL Supply Chain. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, it's a lot of, I've only been doing this for, I guess going on like 8 years now. So, but even in that time, I've seen a lot of change too. And even, where I'm here originally from, I guess the New Jersey area, and, I've seen such an explosion, of warehouses being built in certain areas. Like I know you went to Rutgers, right? In the Cranberry,
Right.
North Brunswick, New Brunswick area is insane. They're just building warehouse. It seems like every week they're like breaking ground on a new one. So it's pretty interesting. And I think you said something interesting in there about the kind of that Amazon effect, right? Where Amazon is delivering the service level and everybody is trying to, I guess, match that because consumers are getting used to that, right? And they're demanding that. So I'm curious, from that perspective, as I guess companies try to match that service level, and also as there's been an increase in e-commerce, and people ordering things online during the pandemic because they've been at home, or brick and mortar stores have been closed. A lot of operations and companies are probably looking at some redesign. How do they rework their current facility to kind of optimize and get that better service level and just get better flow overall? So what are some of your, I guess, insights on how an operation can start to look at a redesign of their facility to accommodate current growth, but then also accommodate future growth as well? What are some of the things like they should initially get into?
Well, in any type of change to warehouse, whether it's to reorganize it, if they may decide that the size is okay, but it just needs to be reorganized based on, again, how they're servicing their customers. I had one client that did full pallet loads. They did case quantities, and they did part cases where they broke cases down. So they had to accommodate in 3 different genres for the same item, because the same item could be shipped 3 different ways. And we had to, when we did the warehouse design, take all of that into account. So it wasn't like designing just one warehouse. It was almost like designing 3 different warehouses, but they all had to fit together. But the first thing they need to do is establish a baseline. They need to understand what are the products that they're dealing with right now, who are the customers that they're dealing with, what kind of quantities are they talking about, both in total and also by customer, because they don't want to necessarily leave the small guy out in the lurch, and that could very easily be done when they're paying attention to their big customers, but the little guys are important too. So they've got to take them into account, and they've got to look at seasonalities. Not every item sells the same throughout the year. When I worked with Kraft Foods in the summertime, barbecue sauce was a big thing, but this time of the year now it's pretty well slowed down, and it's at the back of the warehouse, and other things that are more apt for this time of the year for this season come to play. So they've got to be able to adjust and move things around. You don't just leave everything in place for the full year, but you have to move things around as seasonality dictates. You got to look to the future. Okay, what's here today is all well and good, but what's going to happen tomorrow? What's your growth going to look like? What do you plan on growing like? How many more customers are you going to add? How many more SKUs are you going to get into? And again, like I said, with the one client, they had 3 different means for shipping the same product. Are you going to do that, or are you going to just stick with either full case or full pallet loads? In Crayola's case, all the small stuff, we dealt with distributors. We didn't want to be involved in that, so we would ship to distributors who then would break stuff down and send it. So we didn't have to in smaller quantities. So we didn't have to worry about that. We could do full case or full pallet load. But some places don't have that luxury. What costs are they looking at? Warehousing has a cost to it, and you have to take that into account. And how do you control that? Both through your workforce, the improvements you're going to make to it, because any improvements you make have a cost, and you've got to amortize that cost over your normal operations.
Right.
Then you want to start looking at how much capital do I have and what am I willing to spend? How far do I want to go out with improving my warehouse? And how automated do I want to get?
Mm-hmm.
What new products are going to come down the road? What am I looking at down the road that I'm going to have to add in here? And similarly, what products am I going to be taken out of the mix? Nobody stays with the same product forever. They will go out of business if they do that. So you've got to take that into account. If you've got manufacturing, that's part of your operation. How does the warehouse integrate with that? Is it connected to it? Is it separate? And you've got to move things back and forth from there. So you've got to take that into account. Dealing with high and low volume products. How are they going to be situated? Everybody would love to have just high volume products where they could send a ton of stuff, but that doesn't always work.
Right.
And sometimes you've got to keep the low volume stuff as loss leaders, because people will buy, the high volume stuff from you with the fact that you're also going to send them some of the low volume stuff that they like as well. And if you kind of pull that back, that may impact them. And then how many shifts of operation are you willing to endure? Some places do not want to go beyond one shift operation. They don't want to get into having a second or third shift and having to worry about how they get managed and how they control their production or productivity and all that stuff. So if you're only going to run a one shift operation, that means, and your service level has to be high and you got to get stuff out, that means you're going to pump a lot of stuff out in one shift as opposed to 2 shifts or 3 shifts.
Right.
And also, are you going to do a 5-day operation? You're going to do a 7-day operation. You're going to run around the clock and throughout the week, or are you going to cut it off at some point? So those are all considerations that have to be thought about before you start to actually say, okay, how big is big, and how am I going to lay this thing out? So there's a lot to think about for sure. And I know you've probably gone through this yourself, being in warehousing, that you're constantly thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty interesting, all the different points that you made there, because it kind of highlights the fact that there's so many different factors and moving things and different things to think about that impact the overall experience for the customer in the end, but for the overall process flow within a warehouse. I think way more than people normally think of. It's much more than just throwing up some concrete walls and putting some product inside. There's a lot of things that go into it. So I'm curious, when it comes to, I guess, throwing up some concrete walls, how, we're talking about these mega warehouses, right? But how can a company really decide, like, if they're going to either need to expand or stay within their current facility? How can they really determine the size that they need? Like, how does a company say, you know what, I need 500,000 square feet? What really is the thought process that goes into size? Well, maybe the thought process that should go into the choice of size.
Okay. Well, if you go through all those factors that we just talked about, you can do some calculations, all right, that will tell you. Now, when people talk about the size of the warehouse, they usually talk about square footage, but really you should think of the warehouse in terms of cubic footage, okay, a block. because you're not just talking about going straight out and across, but you're also talking about going up too.
Right.
So when you take those three dimensions into account, your cubic footage as opposed to square footage. But you calculate and you say, how much cubic footage am I going to need to store the things that I've just identified, both for the current and for the future? And usually when I'm working with a client, we're doing a 5-year projection out. But of course, we all know that our crystal balls get a little fuzzy after about a year or a year and a half. So we're taking swags after that year or year and a half. So we put a fudge factor on, may say 20-25% more.
Okay.
But even there, we know that we could be, and in a lot of cases, we probably are going to be wrong. By the time we get to year 2 or 3, it's going to be a different picture than what we envisioned. Hopefully, it'll be better. We have grown even faster, not slower. But if we have, then what happens if we literally have consumed all the space that we thought about and had calculated when we were doing the initial planning? Well, then you've got to look at location, which is, okay, if I need to expand again, can I do it off of the current facility and location that I'm at, or the one that I'm going to select? Do I have enough room that I can do that so I can accommodate for that? But you can do physical calculations, and you can come up with a square footage that says, I need a warehouse that's basically going to have 500,000 cubic feet of space to it, okay? And I'm willing to go so high, and that's a big thing that happens nowadays. You see more and more warehouses that are getting taller,
right?
Okay, because square footage, physical space on the ground gets tighter, and it's actually probably in a lot of cases more expensive to build out than it is to build up. So when you build up, it gets somewhat cheaper. So you look at that, but how high are you willing to go? Some places want to have a cutoff. They don't want to go beyond, let's say, 25 or 30 feet up.
Yeah.
But some mega warehouses could be much higher than that. They could be 40, 50, or 60 feet up.
Yeah.
Again, as you, I'm sure, are well aware, and your listeners are. So you've got to determine that. And, of course, there'll be zoning restrictions. The zoning may say you can only go so high, in which case then you've got a cutoff at that point. So you do all those calculations. You come out with the considerations. And then you do your first cut at what the cost is going to be, and you find out whether you've got the wherewithal to either pay for that or to take out your loan in order to pay for that, with the idea that it'll generate money and it'll pay itself back over time. So you do all that stuff, and then at that point you can come up with, okay, how big is the warehouse going to be? What's it going to look like? Where's it going to be located? You still haven't actually done the design yet. You've still done all the preliminary work, because you don't want to go and do the design only to find out you can't afford it or it doesn't make sense.
Right.
So you want to do that basic stuff first, and then you can start to get into the detail of what am I going to put in there in terms of racking and guidance vehicles and robotics and all that other good stuff. So that's how you start off. Okay, is taking all that stuff into account. So it's quite a process. So when people say, well, it shouldn't be that big a deal, yes, it is a big deal, because if you're doing it right, there's a lot of thought that has to go into it first. You don't just go, like you said, let's pour some concrete walls and now we have a facility. You'll find out very quickly that you haven't planned very well, and you're going to find yourself in trouble very quickly and have to do it all over again, unfortunately, and do it right this time. So
right, exactly, yeah, and I think a lot of times too, when it comes to size, some companies may be, I guess, poised to or fixated on having a larger facility just to say they have a larger facility. But like you mentioned, when you go into all this thing and you actually look at what you need, you may end up with way more space than you actually need, right? And you can end up saving some money there as well.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, in regards to that as well. You talked about whether you're going to have robotics or automation in there, and obviously robotics and automation is just surging in popularity, and we're way past, I think, that phase of robots being like scary, right? It's kind of becoming almost a necessity to make warehouse operations run faster and meet these service levels, and be able to kind of utilize and optimize better the process.
Yeah.
So how has the warehouse design kind of changed to accommodate this? Because I think through your background, you're kind of involved in prior to this real explosion of robotics and automation. I mean, automation has been there in terms of conveyors and things like that, but the real, like, I guess, cool, new, fancy stuff. How has design changed to accommodate these types of things?
Well, for one, height. Okay. With automation, now you don't have to worry about sending somebody up 40, 50, 60 feet in the air to get stuff. You have machines that do that. You can go to narrower aisles. Okay. Instead of having a 10 or 12 foot aisle, you might have a 4 to 6 foot aisle. Okay. So you don't have to have as much travel space in between. You want to put as few columns in your facility as possible. The one bane we always had was there was always a column in the wrong place when we were trying to put things racking or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not, on paper you can move it, in reality you can't. It needs to stay there. So you got to work around it, and just loved all those workarounds. So you see warehouses that will have at least 50-foot distances between columns. If they can stretch it out even more, they will, to 75 or even 100 feet if they can. So that certainly changes the dynamics to a degree. I would say those are the big things, are height, distances between racking or shelving or whatever the case may be, and the spacing of the columns, how the facility is actually constructed, which then gives you more latitude in how you can organize things and don't have to worry about those blasted columns like I always did. And my friends did. We always cursed about it and wish we could take them out, but we couldn't, so we just dealt with them.
Yeah, I've written up some accident reports where people have hit columns, and the the solution of moving the column is not always acceptable.
Right. Yep. And of course, now you've got the ability to have machines that you have to worry about maintaining them, of course, but you don't have to worry about injuries from carpal tunnel and backs and strains and all that type of stuff. But you do have to be aware of them, of course, as you're working in the warehouse, because there still will be people there. Nothing is totally 100% automated and robotic, so you still have to pay attention. They're pretty good at it, but every now and again there are problems with that too. So you got to make sure that when that AGV is coming down, that you're not in the way, because the one time that it decides not to stop because it sees an obstruction is when you get run over. So,
interesting. Yeah. I think it's interesting how things have shifted. Even I think with robotics itself, like design has kind of changed, because when we looked at things when it's Kiva, was kind of the first really big one out there, that needed special special setup and the floor and all those things. And now it seems like everything that's coming out doesn't really need that. It's able to kind of guide on its own. It doesn't need like special wire in the floor or anything like that. So even just in those few years, there's been a change there as well.
Yep.
We're talking about size before. So do you think that robotics and automation has helped to, I guess, reduce the size of a facility that's needed, or do you think it's actually maybe increased the size?
Well, the studies show by a variety of different folks, including companies like McKinsey, that with automation and the ability to go higher than the square footage, the floor space gets reduced by 40 to 50%. But again, we're talking about cube now. We're not just talking about, length and width. So the cubic is still there, okay? But it's just that you're going much higher now instead of lower. Again, some places don't want to do that or can't afford to do that for whatever reason, so they stay at maybe 20, 25 foot height. And, of course, then they've got to accommodate for more square footage in some cases. So they're going to sacrifice that. They don't want to make the investment that it takes in automation and so forth, or they have restrictions that keep them from going that high, like some of the really big places do.
Yeah.
So then they have to do that trade-off, and they will have additional square footage. But the big guys, they're cutting their square footage by, like I said, in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% based on what the studies are. But the overall, an item takes up as much space as it takes up. That doesn't change. If it's 3 by 3 by 3, it's still 3 by 3 by 3, and you've got to accommodate it.
Right.
So you have to have the space for it. Typically, and also the studies have said that companies don't tend to automate too much until they've gotten to at least 500 pallets of materials stored. Once they get to that seems to be the magic point at which then they start to consider getting into to automation to some degree. Up to that point, they're still at, say manual level, because they've still got equipment. They're driving forklifts and tow motors and things along those lines. But the true automation that we're talking about, where you've got AGVs and robotics and things along those lines. So
that's a pretty interesting stat, actually, at 500 pallets stored, because I would think, in a sense, almost, I guess maybe the ROI isn't there, but it would almost kind of benefit you to start automating when you have a little smaller, and then as you grow, you can scale a little more easily instead of trying to kind of do a disruption in the process when there's more product flowing.
Yeah, well, some do. Some want to get started.
Yeah.
I had one client that wanted to fully automate. We didn't think that they should. They caught us on it. They ultimately didn't do it because they really didn't have the money for it. And it was a real dogfight, and they won and they lost because they wound up going out of business. So they lost in the end. But actually, they wound up selling to their competitor. But yeah, they were all hepped on glitz and glamour and automation, which is wonderful if you can really afford it. But you can start to do it, and you can work in such a way that you can slowly get into it. For instance, you can have narrow aisles that aren't automated. There are trucks, the tri-loaders and things like that you can use. And they're not automated. You still have operators that are working with them, and they can go up pretty high. And ultimately, we can add that automation feature down the road. Okay, so you can develop it in such a way that you set yourself up so as time goes on, you can add additional features. and not have to start from ground zero again, rip everything out and put in brand new, but deal with a lot of the things that you've already put in place. And again, those are considerations that companies have to make when they're going through the planning process. And that's the time to do it, because once you start physically pouring those walls and putting those columns up and so forth, it's a little late at that point to make changes, because you're pretty committed at that point. So it's better you can make lots of changes on paper, and it's pretty easy. Once you build it, it's pretty difficult.
Absolutely, I agree, and I've seen it in real time too.
And expensive.
Can we change this? Well, no, we can't.
And then of course you've got the systems part that goes into it too, because as you get sophisticated with that, we creatures, we people, we're pretty adaptable. When we see something that doesn't look right, we go, gee, that doesn't look right, and we modify our behavior and what we do. When you're automated, it's whatever you programmed in, and if it's different and the system doesn't recognize it, it doesn't know what to do with it, and it'll try to do whatever the command was you put in there, and it could be harmful, if it's trying to pick the wrong thing in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
So the systems have to have a lot of information in there. Now, AI, artificial intelligence, will help that learning over time, but that's still really in the early stages. So it's still not to the degree that we adaptable machines known as people are, where we can adapt to circumstances. The downside of that, of course, is we're frailer than a piece of equipment, and we tend to break down maybe a little bit faster and stuff like that. So, but we still are very adaptable to strange situations where they just don't look right, and we have to make a modification.
Definitely, yeah, I totally agree. So very interesting perspective and insights and from your experience. And so I want to thank you, Peter, for coming on the show and talking to us and sharing some of the knowledge that you've gained over the years as well.
Sure thing. I appreciate, again, the opportunity to do that. And I hope that the listeners, learn some things from what we talked about. And if they ever want to talk more about it, they are free to get in touch.
All right, and how can they do that?
They can get me via email. My email is thchristian53@gmail.com. That's thchristian53, the number 53 at gmail.com. I'm on LinkedIn, so you can look me up on LinkedIn, and if you want to connect, and then we can talk about stuff, I am happy to do that. I also have a website. The website is Pete, ChristianBooks.com. Now, that might sound a little odd, but I set it up primarily because of the book that I'm writing, the one that's out and the other, but also it has thing in there where you can get in touch with me, leave me a note, and say I would like to talk to you about such and such, and so you can go on my website and leave me a message. So you got three different ways that you can do that: my email, through LinkedIn, or on my website.
Okay, great, and we'll put all that information on thenewwarehouse.com as well. So, Peter, thank you again for coming on the show and talking to us.
Okay, it was great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the New Warehouse Podcast with Kevin Lawton. Subscribe and check us out online at thenewwarehouse.com.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If you want more content from the New Warehouse, check out our new video series called All Hands on LinkedIn. Just search for the New Warehouse on LinkedIn and follow along.